Hey, welcome to the CalmWithDom podcast, where we harness our highly sensitive nature to overcome our energy leaks and strengthen our relationships with ourselves and with others. I'm your coach, Dominic. This episode is going to be good. Let's get into it. In today's episode, we are talking about the power of apologies and cultivating safer relationships as highly sensitive people. But I have a beloved guest on this episode. Her name is Angeli Luz. She is a holistic coach, a dedicated student of therapy, and a spiritual practitioner. All of her links will be down below. Angeli has also gifted all of my listeners with her codependency workshop. We're gonna get into why this is so important. You can find the link in the description to that workshop as well as the code to gain access to it. It was really cool to hear Angeli's insights on the power of apologies in our relationships and how in certain situations they can be disempowering, and how to avoid sacrificing our power to energy vampires, people who truly don't deserve it. But most importantly, how to use the power of apologies to take back our power and step into it as we show up authentically in our relationships. If you enjoy anything that was said in this episode and you like the video, subscribe to the show so you don't miss another episode, and leave a comment on your thoughts. Definitely putting this in the beginning of the episodes now because I really want to encourage my listeners to engage, let the algorithm know that you're actually enjoying this so that people just like you, just like me, can find this show and find community in this show as I intend it to. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts instead of watch them, definitely leave a review and rate the show if you would like to. And if you are interested in working with me, either one-on-one or you want to gain access to some of my teachings, all of that will be in the link in my description as well. Enjoy this conversation with Angeli Luz. I'm happy to have you on the podcast, the CalmWithDom podcast. Like I've said before, I'm such a fan of your work. I'm a fan of your presence online on my feed. It's always enjoyable. And I like the little conversations that we've had here and there. This, even like the conversation, the snippet, the bite-sized convo that we had in the DMs about the topic of today was enough to like inspire me to be like, I can have this conversation with her and it'll be like a really great one. So I'm really glad that you said yes to this one. Of course, the topic today is just our relationship with forgiveness and how we relate to apologies within our relationships. I feel like that's such a relevant topic for so many reasons, but especially for people who identify as AHSP, people who feel that they're a little more in tune with their own energy, a bit more sensitive than the people around them, even people who are neurodivergent and they can't help the stimulation, the sensory stimuli of an environment. I think all of that can lend to just how our needs show up in relationships. And I remember when I'm actually going to pull up the conversation that we had because I know you had posted something, which I don't think I can see anymore. But the first thing that came up for me was I said, I just had a conversation with a client about this. The fear of apologizing out of defensiveness and how the opposite can look like a willingness to be accountable for your part. And that's what came up for me. And I loved your response because you were like, yeah, like forgiving someone and like apologizing to someone can be very healing. Like you said, putting your pride down to apologize can be very healing. And then with that, you said that over apologizing or overly apologizing can be disempowering if someone is a people pleaser or has doormat tendencies, which I love how you worded that. I was like, doormat tendencies, that's a thing. That's exactly what that is. And I just thought that was really relevant to the conversations that I've been having. And I still feel that way. So, yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you felt like you have, like, officially or properly apologized to anyone? And does it, I guess, because I had, like, the way that I worded this question was, how was the way that you apologized in the past, like your first time, different from how you apologize now? And I asked that question. I more so want to know about your mindset around approaching an apology, whether you're apologizing or someone else is apologizing to you.
Yeah, so I think apologizing is really difficult for a lot of people because we are prideful sometimes and our ego gets in the way. And so that tends to happen to me as well. I'm a human being, you're a human being. So for me, what shows up is like pride or anger. If I'm angry, then like I'm like, oh, I don't want to apologize, or like I don't want to be the bigger person. But then after I take the emotional space to wind down, regulate myself, and see the different perspectives, okay, like maybe I was in the wrong here, then I'm able to like come back out of my hidey hole and be like, oh, I'm sorry that I did X, Y, and Z. And I tend to give like a little bit of an explanation, not an excuse, but an explanation of why that happened after I spend time self-reflecting.
I love that you said, what was it? How did you word it? Hidey hole?
Yeah.
Like when you're hiding in a hole. I love that you, yeah. I I love that you described it that way. When you mentioned hidey hole, I immediately thought of my version of that, which was the opposite. Like for a long time, it was, if that was your hidey hole, in my past looked like climbing on my high horse. And the ego, man, the ego is it popped out to protect often when I was in my first instances of like having to apologize to someone. Do you feel like there is like a clear difference between how you did apologize before and how you go about it, like nowadays, how you find yourself if you have to apologize, just the mindset and feelings, if any feelings or sensations kind of show up for you?
Yeah, I think as a kid, when I apologize, it'd be like, I'm sorry that you're upset. And it's more like, oh, I'm sorry that you're experiencing X, Y, and Z. But as I got older, I've learned the properly way to apologize and to take accountability for the people that you care about and you want to keep close. That's another thing. I don't think everybody deserves an apology. And I think that if you really care about someone, then obviously you want to apologize. You want that person in your life. So you kind of have to, I have learned to put my pride down. I've learned to get off my own high horse and really just like be like, okay, I'm sorry that I hurt you. And I'm sorry that I did X, Y, and Z to you. And then I'll provide like a solution, how can I make it better? Or, next time I'll do this instead. Or next time, can you, for example, like let me know in advance or something. And whatever caused me to be upset and then accidentally hurt the other person, I would be like, next time, can you let me know or do this? And then I won't get reactive, etc.
That kind of goes into another question I was going to ask you about, like the type of apology you prefer or the type of apology that you go for, versus what you want to hear. I don't know if you're familiar with the apologies languages, but you just made me think of that because I'm someone who offers solutions that way. Of like, if I'm going to apologize, It looks like taking accountability and also being offering a plan or something, or like, how do I avoid this in the future? Basically, how do I avoid hurting you in the future? And it sounds like you're the same way.
Yeah, definitely very solution oriented because I don't want it to keep repeating. Then it just can get toxic.
There was something else that you said that it made me think of something else. Do you feel like, or where do we draw the line between between being self-aware and taking accountability and approaching an apology without kind of like losing our power, if that makes sense? It's like, yeah, I'm apologizing to you, but without taking all the blame. And do you feel like you can do it with everyone?
So I think it definitely depends. I would say it's a case by case basis because every situation is different. But what I've noticed is people who over apologize, they over apologize for everything. Like, I'm sorry about this, and I'm sorry about that, and I'm sorry about this. And I feel like I have to remind some people, like some of my friends, that they'll do that. They'll overly apologize for everything. I'm like, you don't have to apologize. It's okay. And I used to do that too. I think like used to be a little bit more apologetic about every little thing in my life. And I've noticed I become like just a lot more empowered and more confident and secure in myself when I stop overly apologizing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's the people who they can be very aggressive and they never apologize. And they tend to have an extreme amount of pride and they don't want to let it go. And so that is the kind of people that can kind of be like gaslighty, and or even if they're not gaslighting somebody, they can just end up hurting somebody. And a lot of times they're not self-aware, but they think the world revolves around them. But then the people pleasers, it's not that they think the world revolves around them, but they just feel like they shouldn't take up space in the world, and they have a hard time like just existing without apologizing for their existence. So they tend to be very insecure. Whereas the other end of the spectrum, the more prideful, non-apologizers, I don't know what to call them, can lean towards having narcissistic traits, but they can also definitely be more like the kind of people that just don't see the point in apologizing. They might lack empathy, whereas I think people pleasers might have too much empathy.
What would your advice be to someone who is definitely disempowered in their apologies? So someone like the highly empathetic person, in regards to like when they're dealing with someone who's just lacks empathy, like a narcissistic, or just a person who is gaslighty, defensive, and who lacks self-awareness. What would be your advice to those people on navigating apologies?
I would tell them not to take the person who lacks empathy, not to take their words, like they tend to say hurtful words because they want to hurt the other person. And so that's the extreme end, of course. Most of us fall somewhere in the middle. And so I would say not to take their words at heart because they're just spouting stuff. They're just either trying to hurt you or they're just not self-aware and they're just spouting stuff. And at the end of the day, you're not responsible for fixing them or healing them. They have to do their own inner work. And if you feel the need to fix those kinds of people or to still surround yourself with those kinds of people, even though they've crossed your boundaries multiple times, then I would tell those people to reevaluate their own boundaries and really like ask themselves, like, why am I still around this person if this person has hurt me so many times and doesn't care? Or maybe they've apologized, but they keep repeating the same thing like over and over and over, like 100 times. Or maybe they're just not doing the inner work. So like, why would you surround yourself with somebody like that? And typically that will come from a childhood wound that they have, like a attachment wound, a childhood wound that they have. And so they have to revisit that experience and that wound. And yeah, like don't blame yourself for their reactions. For somebody who's non empathetic, don't blame yourself and cut them off if you can, because yeah,
Seriously.
they're not going to change. You're not going to fix them. You're not going to heal them. I used to think that I could like fix people. And I think a lot of us, like empathetic, like very empathetic people, can be like, oh, we can just help them or fix them or see the potential in somebody. And that just doesn't work.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, it just hurts you more because you're not going to help them.
100%. Yeah, and I feel like even that note, for some reason, I want to mention, like, you can't fix them and they can't fix you, like, too. Because I feel like that definitely hits on the note that you mentioned about when the highly empathetic person is disempowered in their apologies and always apologizing for everything. It's like finding your self-worth. It can only be found like within you dictate that. And it's hard when, I know, even like as highly sensitive people, when you're so aware of your environment and you're picking up on the emotions of everyone else, and you have the capacity to consider that you play a part in how that person is feeling, oh my gosh, it's so easy to like slip into is this my fault? Are you over there because I didn't tend to you properly? Like, did I miss something? And it's just because we're so used to catching subtleties, it's easy to almost like make it a burden to, or make it our responsibility, and no one told us to do that in the first place. It's such a slippery slope because I feel like with gaslighters, with narcissists, or just I love that you mentioned this too. Thank you for mentioning that it's a spectrum, and we fall in between the spectrum, and you don't have to be a narcissist. It's such a hot word now, but like to display narcissistic, behaviors, and it's just easy for people who lean or have some narcissistic behaviors, again, from childhood, to be unaware of how that trauma is showing up for them and how they respond and like behave towards you, to maybe even unconsciously like pick up on the fact that you're so hyper aware and you're so adaptable and flexible to their needs that it's quite easy to take advantage of that.
Yeah, exactly what you were saying about that. And I just also wanted to point out about how it takes a lot for somebody to actually be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. So people are just calling everybody narcissist nowadays, when what they really mean is this person has narcissistic traits. I think it can be an easy way to demonize somebody too if you're not careful, for sure.
There is this thing of like people who display narcissistic behaviors, they tend to keep themselves the victim of a lot of situations. And that's where that like emotional manipulation shows up. But also, as like the highly empathetic person in the situation, if you're kind of doing the damage for them by victimizing yourself so much, that's again where we remain disempowered. I love that you mentioned that, because I was gonna say, or trying to figure out how to word it the best way, but to victimize yourself also, it also excuses you of showing up and taking accountability, and it's easy to do the same thing, like dish out the same harm that you may be getting in return, basically. Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And as well for people who are like people pleasers and who try to fix people, a lot of them have their own controlling wounds. So a lot of them will try to fix people or to help people and then expect something in return, or they'll try to fix people as a way of controlling other people, or they're being a people pleaser because it's their way of getting control in the world. So a lot of them have to also make peace with their own shadow.
Mm, I love that you said that. Thank you. That's a conversation that I enjoy having. We could stay here actually. I want to ask you some questions about that because I've noticed I've noticed a bit of a trend just in the work that I do, and I want to ask if like that's something that you've also recognized in your work, in your personal life. Like, I mean, I can honestly say that I have wanted to uh, keep or remain in control of certain situations in my life for a long time before I decided to like spend some time in my shadows basically and get uncomfortable. Do you, or you know what, I'll just leave it open ended, like what are some examples that come to mind of like someone with the trauma, with experience dealing with again uh, energy vampires, to use a broad term, their experience with control, like what's their relationship with control usually that you've noticed?
Yeah, the thing is, energy vampires aren't always like aggressive and in your face, but a lot of times they are people with victim mindsets that drain you as well. So it goes both ways. There's some that are more aggressive, and there's some that are stuck in a victim mentality. But then I've noticed a lot of people are also unconsciously energy vampires. Like, I don't think most people are out there and they're like, I'm going to drain your energy. It's very subconscious. I knew someone, for example, that was very codependent on me, and I didn't even realize this person was an energy vampire because I was feeding into their codependency. Like, I was letting myself, I guess, get distracted by it. Like, like, I wouldn't respond to them. They would text me like 3 to 5 more times. And that lasted for a long time, like about a year or two. And then the one time that I set a boundary, then that person cut me off. I set a boundary, and yeah, so definitely have boundaries in place and protect your own energy, because energy vampires aren't always like people that are trying to purposely manipulate you, take advantage of you, but it can be as simple as somebody being codependent on you.
Oh my God, so well said, and I agree with every word. It's so important. What do you feel about, there is something there about boundaries and having a sense of control that I'm interested in kind of touching on. I don't know how I want to touch on it, but I feel like there is a correlation there. Whether one thing that comes to mind right away is like, well, the lack of boundaries. Do you feel that maybe a lack of boundaries lends to the people pleasers to have or maintain a sense of control, or that without boundaries there is no control? Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, without boundaries, it's like, where do you begin and where do you end, right? And so you tend to enmesh yourself with other people, with family members, really easy to enmesh with family members. And so it's like you have to know where you begin and where you end. And so that's what boundaries are there for. They help us with our limitations, they help us understand our own needs, and they're ways of how we navigate our being. They're like doors, not walls. Some people think that boundaries are like walls. Like, for example, I've seen people like want to be like emotionally avoidant and not take accountability. And that would be a wall, not a door. So that's not actually not a boundary. That's just their own walls and wounding. And so I think there's definitely a lot of confusion with boundaries too. Like there was a recent situation where I believe a celebrity, I think it was Jonah Hill and his ex-girlfriend, that situation definitely upset me because there was this whole debate of like, oh, he's setting boundaries. He was trying to control her essentially. And his girlfriend, she was a surfer, and she like has always been like, posting bikini pics and all of that because she's a surfer and hanging out with certain people. That's her career. And he started trying to control her. He's like, I don't want you posting bikini pictures. I don't want you hanging out with your crazy friends. Da, 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 da. And this is a boundary. Like, no, no, no. Boundaries is not about controlling other people either. It's just about controlling yourself, knowing your own limits, and you can express your boundaries to other people. And if they respect them, they're valuable people that you want to keep in your life, because not everybody's going to respect you. Most people will not respect your boundaries, in fact. And so I would say that those people you definitely want to keep around, and people who are learning your boundaries, you want to keep them around. But the most important thing, of course, is to know your own boundaries, know your own limitations, and express them whenever you have to.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I agree 100%. There is like, I love that you said that boundaries are doors, not walls, because, yeah, like avoidance, it is such a clear sign of that. Like avoidance within yourself. If there's something you don't even want to like look at, even for a second, because it makes you uncomfortable, that's, there's nothing to respect and honor there, because there's no space for a conversation. Boundaries is allowing space for the conversation. Like, this is what it is for me. You can either respect it or not, but no matter what, there's openness about the thing. And you can't be open about something you don't even want to talk about. I wanted to talk to you about the importance of forgiveness for our self-healing and closing spiritual cycles. And yeah, I left it that broad because I feel like we can take it anywhere. But what are your thoughts on that? Like the role forgiveness plays in our own healing?
I think that forgiveness frees you from karma, but I also think that forgiveness isn't necessarily about the other person. You don't have to let the other person know you've forgiven them, right? There's so many different kinds of forgiveness. There's self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others, and self-forgiveness. Obviously, that's something we should all practice more, especially if you're overly apologetic, if you're hanging around people who do have narcissistic tendencies, or you tend to get eloped with people who drain you and hurt you constantly, then you do have to forgive yourself for allowing yourself to stay in those hurtful situations, for allowing yourself to stay in a victim mentality. You do have to forgive yourself for that. And then the other type of forgiveness, which is forgiveness of others. And that one is also very complicated, I would say, because there's always this debate between should we forgive, should we not forgive. The way that we see it, in psychology, right? Because I'm training to be a therapist. And so the way that we see it in psychology is that forgiveness is about yourself and releasing yourself from the other person. So it's more about freedom. But it can also be very liberating if it's somebody that you do want to heal your relationship with, let's say a family member, and you want to say, like, hey, I forgive you for hurting me, X, Y, and Z, then that can really open up that person's heart as well. And so it is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, I know, but forgiveness essentially frees you from karma. And so I do suggest to practice forgiveness, even if it just means letting go of that person. You don't want to speak to them ever again.
Beautifully said. I so agree with the fact that forgiveness is key in detachment, honestly, and making sure that we are not attaching ourselves to anyone. That I think ultimately, going back to the touching on the topic of karma, it's super important, right? Like there are so many ways in which we can find ourselves tied to other people for and in ways that just don't serve us. And yeah, I love that you mentioned that you don't have to actually speak your forgiveness out loud. It's interesting. I feel like another thing that comes up for me in the conversations that I have with my clients, that concerns of whether they've forgiven the person or not comes up a lot. And with that, there's this expectation of like, well, if you've forgiven this person, then ideally, like, you shouldn't do XYZ, like whatever it is. But there is this like picture of what forgiveness looks like, and I think that can lean into like performative forgiveness of like, I forgive you, I'm so okay, when that may not be true, and you don't have to actually sound like that or do that. So yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I think it really just frees you from your past, and it just allows you to just break the chains of your own grudges and your own resentments.
Beautifully said. I can hear you talk about this forever. Angeli, before I let you go today, would you like to share where my audience can find you and anything else that they can look forward from you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Angeli X Luz. That's ANGELI Luz, LUZ. And I also have a website, angeliluz.com, ANGELILUZ.com. And I also wanted to gift your listeners my codependency workshop. It'll be down in the description.
Perfect. That sounds so good and so helpful, especially for the highly sensitive women who listen to this show. So definitely check out the link and the description for all of those, where you can find Angeli and that workshop. Thank you so much, Angeli, for being here today. I so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I love talking to you too.
And that is a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. You have definitely heard a bunch of different qualities of audio in this episode, and I wish I could have addressed it at the beginning, but this is a one-man show. It's just me. This is editing Dom. And with not the best editing software, and honestly, that's okay. We're dealing. Things will get better as the show progresses. I will have we'll have better equipment, hopefully. The beauty of editing these episodes myself is getting to go through the journey of the frustrations of the quality that I want to present, but ultimately I'm so happy with this conversation. I know I had to share it, and we are doing weekly videos. We're doing weekly episodes. No questions about it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've committed to the show and in providing deep, insightful episodes for you to hopefully benefit from. So thank you for listening this far. My goal is to little by little have more guests come on the show, because I love having these conversations with like-minded individuals who have a boatload of experience and expertise on some of these topics. Angeli was such a sweetheart. We had actually just met the day of recording this conversation, and it was so pleasant to learn more about Angeli. Check out the description and all of her links, plus her codependency workshop. And if you have any questions about working with me, or you have any topics that you want me to touch on the podcast, my information is below, and I do accept one-on-one clients on an ongoing basis. So you can check out all that information down below. I've loved spending time with you today. I will see you next week.